The Beast of Loughby Island, Chapter 1. Written and narrated by Matt Doyle. Joe Atkins hated sailing at night. He'd won the boat on an episode of Bullseye in the late 80s, and while it still worked, he'd learned years ago that he knew nothing about maintaining speedboats, or sailing them for that matter. As a result, his little delivery jaunts were choppy affairs. Even so, he had faith in the machine. It had been built in the Midlands, meaning it was like him, solid, British, and unrelenting. That didn't stop him from struggling to sea, though. This sort of mission required a degree of stealth, so he couldn't exactly light up the way ahead. Tonight, the sun had seemed to set early too, meaning he couldn't rely on the low light to alert him when to slow down near the island. But this was necessary work. Kent needed to be cleaned up, and if no other fucker was going to do it, Joe damn well would. Best of all, this time, both his kids were coming along for the ride. That was enough to make him smile, at least. A grunt came from the back of the boat, and Joe hissed, "Oi, keep him quiet. We're just coming up on the bank." "You heard him," Robbie chuckled, and the unmistakable sound of a hand slapping the back of someone's head cut the grumbling short. Joe swung the boat to the right and brought the speed down as he angled towards the muddy bank. It was the same place he always parked up when dropping off an undesirable, and he preferred to stop side on so he didn't have to get his feet wet. The boat drifted onto Loughby Island with a satisfying bump, and Joe turned towards his son. "Help your sister." "And you," he growled, grabbing his cargo by the shoulder and shoving him towards the land. "Gear off." "Which way?" Laura asked. Joe nodded his head towards the woods at the top of the hill. "Stick close. You don't want to get lost here. You'll end up indoctrinated or whatever." "I can't see," the man said, his voice muffled by the sack over his head. Joe shoved him in the back, forcing him forward. "Shame that, ain't it? Keep quiet, walk where I say, and maybe I'll let you know if you're going to walk into anything." The man's shoulders sagged, but he started walking. Though tempting to let him just walk into trees, Joe was true to his word. If nothing else, he didn't want the idiot drawing the unnecessary attention if he made a racket. To that end, he kept his own voice low as he explained to his kids, "This little hellhole has turned too many people soft. Still, it keeps the bleeding hearts all in one place, don't it?" "I could think of a few more I'd like to send here," Robbie said. "That bloody Carl Rogers down the street for one." "You and me both, lad." Joe hauled the man to the side, avoiding a large rock, and asked, "And why can't we just chuck him over here?" "Because the police, blah, blah, blah," Robbie replied, his eye roll creeping into his voice. "You better take that seriously, you little prick. You tried to do one of these deportation trips with a local fella and we all get in the shit. Lost little lamb like this one," he said, slapping the man on the shoulder. "They'll never know." "They knew about Dougie Walters," Laura sighed. Joe grimaced. That had been a misjudgment on his part, one that almost got all of them in trouble. Only because he's technically still local, even if he is a worthless waste of space. Robbie shrugged. "Didn't he used to be a teacher or something, though?" Joe fought to keep his body language strong and upright. "What you were don't mean shit, lad, only what you are. Take me. I was a foreman, ran that factory like a well-oiled machine in the best and worst of times. Now look at me. I worked every day of my adult life until they closed that place. I paid enough in taxes to fund a small town of dole scroungers. I earned my break. Earned the right to let someone else look after me for a change. You look at how those people look at me. At us. Like we're fucking scum." "One of these tossers wanders in," Laura growled, giving the man a kick up the arse. "They get all the help in the world." "Exactly. That's why I do this. Why I want you two to as well. We're keeping the streets clean, keeping people out of our benefit pool. Some other place wants to fund their lifestyle, let them do it, but I won't see our town fall under the rule of dossers and immigrants. Even if none of them in town know what we're doing for them, we do. Working in the shadows, fighting the good fight. Like a family of superheroes." Robbie stood taller, his pride almost moving his steps into a march. "Proper British vigilantes," Laura added. "That's what we are." Joe smiled and led the group further into the woods. Even without a torch, he knew the route well enough now that he wasn't about to get them lost. It was the one thing he liked about this place. It never changed. The people of Loughby Island never wanted to develop more land than they had to, and the population never swelled. It just trickled upward. then subsided again if one of Joe's drop-offs didn't stick around. Up ahead, torchlight shone through the darkness, and a voice drifted between the trees. "Get down," Joe hissed. Dragging the man to the floor and gripping his coat tight, he crawled quickly to the side, pulling the man with him. "This way, get behind the bush. Keep quiet, all of you, or I fucking swear what I do is going to be far worse than anything that cop does." The group huddled together, and Joe heard one of his kids inhale sharply as the voice drew near. "You'll never guess what happened to me today." It was a woman. Joe relaxed a little. If it came down to it, he was pretty sure he could take any woman in a fight. Certainly far easier than he could that turncoat Cole, anyway. The woman laughed as she came to a stop a few feet from the bush. The torchlight swung around a few times, barely catching the tips of the leaves, and she said, "That's right, fuck all." She lingered for a moment, then walked on, her voice slowly fading into the night. "Well, that's the sleepover shift for you. How are you two? Not missing me too much, I hope?" They waited in silence for a moment. Then Robbie asked, "Dad, what if she finds the boat?" Joe shook his head. "She won't. I picked that spot because you can't see it from the hill. The patrol here doesn't go down that bank unless they spot something." "What if she does? Look, I never said this wasn't dangerous. Think about the bigger picture, lad. Come on, let's get this done." They continued on in silence until they reached the edge of the woods. There, Joe grabbed the man by the shoulder again, pulling him to a stop, and removed the sack from his head. The man took a deep breath and asked, "Where are we?" Joe pointed down a little stony path. "You follow that, you'll find the town." He put one hand behind his back and signalled to his kids. "They're well known for taking in waifs and strays, so you shouldn't have any trouble fitting in with the other misfits." "But I can barely see. Can't I at least have a torch or something?" "You won't need one. Someone will find you soon enough." Joe felt the dampness of the rag Laura had placed in his hand, and for the second time that night he reached around the man and forced it against his face. The struggle was minimal this time, like the guy was resigned to his fate. After a moment, he dropped to the ground. Robbie looked down at the man. "So what now? Should we take his bag or his wallet?" "We'll have none of that," Joe said, his tone firm. "Yeah, we're the good guys, remember?" Laura scoffed. "Heroes don't steal." "Exactly. Plus, we get caught with his stuff, that ties us back to him, don't it? Why do you think I said we don't use our names here? We have to be careful not to let him, or anyone else who might hear us, know who we are." Joe cracked his neck, and for a moment he thought he saw something in the darkness ahead, like two eyes peering over the hill. He frowned. "Let's get back to the boat. Keep quiet, right, just in case that cop doubles back." The family headed back through the woods. Joe could feel the excitement pouring off the kids. Even moving silently, there was no hiding it. They kept giving each other playful glances, and their bodies were full of the same nervous tension they had when he took them to their first football games. In a way, he felt like he was betraying them right now. This was exactly how he wanted them to feel joining him at his work. He should be over the moon at that reaction, but he couldn't even bring himself to join in with the smiles. Joe wanted to believe the excitement they all felt explained their faster pace, but he knew that wasn't it. He was leading the way and moving quicker than he would normally. With speed came the increased risk of noise, and with noise came the chance they'd be caught. This was reckless. But something was off about those eyes. Joe couldn't place it, but something told him they were wrong. Worse, he was certain he'd seen them again. Yeah, he told himself, letting his eyes glance quickly to the left. Whatever it is flanking us. "Probably just one of those foxes I dropped off," Joe muttered. "You say something?" Robbie asked. Joe waved his hand dismissively and stepped out onto the muddy bank. Giving the area a quick glance, he didn't find any sign of either the cop or the weird eyes. Still, he thought, better to play it safe. "Okay," Joe said, turning towards his kids. "I'm going to make sure the coast is clear. You two wait here, and..." Joe's mouth dropped open. A dark shape rose behind his daughter. It was a man, but not a man. Now, unable to look away, Joe realized what was wrong with those eyes. It was hard to tell in the dark, but where there should have been white, the eyes looked black. The irises, those shone like dogs, except in a bright crimson. It all happened too quickly. Laura screamed in pain as the monster effortlessly tossed her to the side. Robbie turned towards his sister's voice. "What the fuck?" The creature dove onto Robbie, its rage-filled screech turning to a gargle of blood as it sunk its teeth into his throat. The moment they hit the sand, it whipped back its head, ripping away a chunk of flesh, spraying blood as it snapped its jaws and swallowing the raw meat. A single tear fell from Robbie's eye, and something clicked in Joe's head. "You bastard!" he roared, and ran towards the beast. He hit it hard with his shoulder, forcing it away from his son as they both tumbled to the side. Joe was not the young man he once was. Back in his youth, he'd get in brawls regularly, especially after football, and he could take damn near anybody in a fight. These days, he was slower, and he had a few extra pounds of flab on him, but he was still tough. And right now, he needed to be. He knew Robbie was done for, and he struggled to fight back the tears for that. But he couldn't see Laura. His daughter had enough sense to run. Whether she went to the boat or the cops, it didn't matter. But he had to keep her safe, buy her time. So he rose to his feet, his chest puffed up and hands out ready to box. The creature rolled up onto all fours and Joe advanced, raining punches into its face and screaming with rage with each swing. He threw everything he had behind each blow, seemingly keeping the monster from rising to its feet. Left, right, left, right, right, left. Each punch found its mark, drawing a grunt or a snarl from the beast, its anger rising with every impact. When his arms began to sag, Joe changed tact and smashed a hard boot up under the monster's chin, causing it to yelp in surprise. He stumbled back, panting loudly as he growled, "Have that, you fuck!" The creature turned one eye towards Joe, pulled its lips back into a malicious smile and rose to its full height, giving it an extra foot or two of terror to catch the glow of the moon. Everything about it seemed wrong. Its cruel expression, bloody gums and dripping fangs were somehow neither wholly man nor beast, yet the familiar but disparate parts were still enough to make the thing look somewhere between canine and human, all wrapped up in a big bloody bow of nightmares. Joe's blows hadn't done a damn thing. The monster was waiting for him to punch himself out. Or maybe it was just testing him to see what he had, and now it stalked towards him. Joe became hyper-aware of every little thing it did, the way it idly flexed its clawed hands, the visible breath that billowed out from its throat with each long step, the rise and fall of its chest as it lowered its head and cocked it to the side, studying him. Its human-like shape made every movement a mini-horror of its own, and the speed at which it approached was terrifying. Before he could react, claws pierced Joe's cheek. Teeth buried themselves in his stomach. The beast shoved him back by the head, its hand ripping through his lower face, the pain mingling with the discomfort of the cold, wet ground slamming against his back. Lying on the muddy bank of Loughby Island, Joe realized he could no longer move. He had grown cold, numb. He was vaguely aware of the sensation of his insides being dragged outside, each tug accompanied by a happy grunt from his attacker. Joe knew he'd been too slow to save Robbie, but right now he was at least distracting the thing long enough for Laura to get further away. Mustering what little resolve he had left, Joe blinked and forced himself to look upward. "If I'm going to die," he thought, "at least I'm going to do it looking at Britain's beautiful starry sky." The monster seemingly grew tired of the taste of Joe's guts and slowly crawled forward until its face hovered over the man, blood and saliva dripping onto what remained of his cheek. Joe couldn't help but stare now. A human-like head distorted by a short, menacing snout, oversized teeth that stopped it from fully bringing its lips together. Whatever this thing was, it looked like it wasn't always what it had become. The way it twitched, it was like it was in pain. Joe didn't have the time to let his clarity turn into sympathy. Mouth stretched wide, the creature snapped its head forward, digging its teeth into Joe's face. He felt his eyes pulled from the sockets, and just for a moment, he saw the back of the monster's throat. Then, there was only darkness.